Om Shanti. And warm welcome to Interview with the Raj Yogi. Our theme tonight is self-respect. And as usual, we'll just start with a short reflection. With just one thought, I take my attention inwards. My eyes are open, but my attention is on my inner world. And at this time, going very deep inside. It's like diving into the ocean. The waves are on the surface, thoughts of day-to-day life, feelings towards different issues and situations, all on the surface. But I dive deeper inside. And the deeper I go, the more calm and quiet it becomes. Going down into the depths, knowing that in the depths of the ocean, in the depths of my inner world, that's where the treasures are found. And there's just one treasure I am seeking: to fully know the self. It seems most of the time I only have an ordinary or externally based sense of self. But to have a very rich and sacred experience of the self, that is what I am seeking. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti, good evening, and welcome to Interview with Raj Yogi. So tonight's session is self-respect. It might seem like it's a very small couple of words, but it's, and I would say it's a thought-provoking topic, especially in the context of spirituality, with however many viewers there are who are online now or will watch this archived session. Perhaps we all have our own ideas of what that means. So in the context of Raja Yoga, what is self-respect and how is that different from, or should it be different from what one thinks of when they hear that word?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's made up of two parts, two experiences: self and respect. And respect is easy to define, the perspective one has towards inwards. And perhaps once again, whereas self is where things get complicated, because our sense of self is extremely tied up with the physical, with the external, with the temporary. And so my vision on the self is just tied up in those things. And so we start to fall into something called external validation, where my sense of value is caught up in things that are quite temporary and really external. So we're looking for a sense of self that truly is tied to the self, that is independent, unconditional, always there. Even when I make mistakes, it's there. Extremely constant, powerful sense of self. So we want to link it to eternal things, things that are constant. This means a sense of self that is constant or eternal. And that's really the realm of spirituality which Raj Yoga explores.
So, what would you say? I know we obviously want to go a little deeper too, but what signs would there be if one has self-respect? Because
Mm.
I've had conversations with some before, and they're like, "I have self-respect,"
Mm-hmm.
and perhaps maybe it's when they get really mad or disappointed in others or controlling. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
"No, no, I have self-respect." So, what would be the indicator if one has one?
Yeah, there's some pretty powerful words that come up when we're talking about the indicators. Of course, one of them is able to give respect to others, even those who you might perceive or others might perceive as insulting you. So we definitely saw that in Brahma Baba, the first student of the study, and all of the original students of the study. They just had incredible capacity to respect others because of that self-respect. So that saying we have, for oranges, that when you squeeze an orange, what comes out? Orange juice. So under pressure, whatever is in the self is all that comes out. So if one has self-respect, respect within the self, when you squeeze, put them under pressure, then all that comes out is respect. So that's one of the big signs. But also, you kind of throw out this word called boundaries, which I find a very interesting word. The idea that someone could snatch away my self respect. So I need to put boundaries up. And I'm always struck by that Eleanor Roosevelt quote, which the words elude me, but in essence, no one can make you feel bad without your consent. So, this idea that we're talking about a state which you don't need any boundaries, you don't need to put up boundaries, you don't need to protect, because no one can take it away. It is innate, intrinsic within the self. So it's constant, as you were saying again, regardless of what comes at you. That is how one responds with respect. Some refer to it as humility. The foundation of humility is self-respect. So it's a very powerful state that I think is essential for growth. The opposite of self-respect is ego. And ego loves to be right, and ego wants other people to change, and ego is very self righteous. It's very difficult to grow where there is ego. But for those who have self respect, they grow so quickly, so much more quickly than those who are clever. So it's a very powerful state.
So, just to clarify, what do you mean by clever?
Mm. Again, that kind of state of ego where I can do a lot of intellectual gymnastics and have a very beautiful image, but it's kind of a house of cards. It's a facade. It's not really based on. I think of self-respect as a very pure feeling towards the self. There isn't that pure feeling towards the self, so it's very difficult to be honest and clear with the self.
So, perhaps it might be me, but I'm not sure of how many ever think about spirituality and think of self respect.
Mm,
Um, Sometimes I think we think of spirituality, it's a very loaded term, or
mm,
maybe we think of spirituality and we think of God. or we think
Mm,
of spirituality and we think it's irrelevant to life, or we think of spirituality as like, running away and just ignoring reality. And so, in the context of this is an interview with Raj Yogi, so this is about Raj Yoga. And if those who have taken the course or have heard us share, the first lesson is about being a soul.
mhm,
So that word soul, four-letter word, is a very loaded term
mm,
um, for some. And so what for some it's such an abstract thing about
mm,
what a soul is or being a soul or what does it mean to experience that. What is this connection then? I know we hear it, but what is this
mm,
connection you have experienced between considering myself to be a soul and self-respect? What have you felt during your years in this study?
mm. So, one of the words that we can interchange with soul is a six-letter word, which is spirit. And I hear people say that a lot with a little bit more understanding. Um, so we talk about, wow, the greatness of the human spirit. And at those moments, we're referring to a demonstration of a certain quality. So it might be that they are being extremely kind in very difficult situations, or showing resilience or forgiveness, or or grace. So it's always referring to a quality, a demonstration of a quality or character. And that simply is what the realm of spirituality is. So when we say I'm a soul, I'm really, it's like the key that unlocks this realm of what really matters to us, qualities and character. And so it's really in qualities and character that the value of the self is experienced. If I was to look at the opposite of spirituality, it's physicality. And physicality is made up, obviously, of the physical body, and by virtue of the body, it's made up of physical things that I think are mine. Relationships, by virtue of this body, I have certain relationships. So that's the physical paradigm or realm. If I deposit my sense of self in that, my self respect in physicality, what I'm saying is my value is dependent on the state of the body, or my value is dependent on the stuff I have, or my value is dependent on how I am perceived in relationships or how those are going. My value is dependent on the positions I hold. That's what physicality says. So spirituality is saying that isn't where my value is invested. And you can see where the difficulty might be in having my value in those things. Spirituality is saying the value is in the self. It is not in any way, not even the body. And so we're being invited in spirituality to, first of all, do I exist? If you take all those things away, what's left? Right? If you take away the relationships and the possessions and the positions and even the body, what's left? And that's really the entry point. And that's where we enter the realm of qualities. And what we begin to discover is that, when it comes to, it's not that we want to step away from all those things. The body isn't bad, relationships aren't bad, but I am taking from those things because I think they're me. I'm taking my sense of value from those things rather than giving value to those things, which means I'd have to have the value within the self. So spirituality is trying to reverse the formula by which we live, rather than quantity of life, taking quality of life, giving. So that means I really have to cultivate a sense of self that's independent of those things, and then discover the value in that new sense of self.
So, what does that feel like to say, to go into that experience of being a soul? And perhaps the intention of hearing you share is perhaps maybe for those who are studying it or practicing to see, what's happening with me, and maybe it kind of helps to have someone who
Mhm.
has some practical experience. So, what am I supposed to be feeling when I'm at least making this endeavor?
I think one of the top things that bother us or those who find themselves interested in understanding spirituality is the way that we act, is being affected by things, by becoming ugly, um, the feeling that we're very reactive, very sensitive, the feeling that we're almost very vulnerable, that we're on emotional roller coasters, this volatility of our lives, this sense of losing ourselves
Mhm.
so much. When that becomes very difficult, and we love this word dignity. And when we feel that our dignity is gone, when we are compromising ourselves all over the place, where we're not able to maintain our state um, of real character in different situations. And actually, what really bothers us, although we rationalize it into the ground, is when we don't treat others well. That really bothers us. It really affects our conscience. So when we start to feel those things bothering us, we want to get to the seed of why that's happening and what can I do about it, and yeah, we can try to rationalize. And I know for me, as I'm thinking about it, um, when I heard this idea, and Raj Yoga means royalty or mastery of the self, when I heard this idea of being able to maintain dignity, whatever is going on, even if people are angry at me, insulting me, even if I've made mistakes, whatever the case, but to maintain dignity, to respond in a benevolent way, that really touched me deeply. And I realized that is spirituality in a nutshell. Um, and if that attracts someone, if that's really important to them, um, then this sort of logic that I need to get into a state, if I'm going to give out goodness, I need to get into a state where I feel good about myself. I've got a stock of goodness inside. That's what we really look at with spirituality. So it's remarkable, we these things we've done, these we say spiritual crimes, if you will, against ourselves and others, where we don't treat ourselves well and therefore we don't treat others. They really actually accumulate in the self and they wear down our sense of self-worth. We don't have a great relationship with ourselves. So I really feel that self-respect is healing that relationship with the self. You start to, again, having faith in the self. One of the top things I remember experiencing in my early meditations, we have the concept of God in Raj Yoga. And I always felt these conversations with God were fairly repetitive. I would come with this thought or that thought or this question. I'd always get the same answer: believe in yourself, believe in yourself. It's like God was a broken record. I think
Mhm.
sometimes he just left the record on. He could leave the room and just, you know. And it's true. We're walking around looking very competent, very skilled on the outside, but it's like a shell. Inside, there isn't really that deep, deep faith and worth and, you know, royal feelings, pure feelings towards the self. So then we really get ugly. We really have nothing to give. We're not operating at our best. And then that makes us feel, again, really affects our relationship with ourselves. So to be able to heal the relationship with the self is so critical because every other relationship, not just with people, but with resources, everything matter. Every other relationship is dependent on the relationship with the self. So it has to be very good quality. So that's what I love about Raj Yoga, and the role God plays in that is helping me to restore the relationship with myself.
It's interesting because it feels like there are often quite loaded perceptions we have about spirituality.
Mm.
One of them is that this doesn't feel accessible. Maybe that's not actually the word one uses, but um, some really find that there's a sense of fear, right?
Mhm.
Or perhaps they feel there's no time, or they feel like this has nothing to do with life, but they're all seemingly a subtle sign that perhaps don't feel they can actually access the feelings of what it really feels like to value yourself,
Mhm.
to say soul and self-value. I mean, we can say the words, but the gap between that experience.
Yeah, I was remembering sometimes in dance class, um, you would go in, and the idea, especially with something like, say, a jazz class, is the instructor had a full routine that she'd already choreographed in her head. And the idea was that in the course of one 60 or 90-minute class, you're going to learn this routine. And she'd start the class by showing you the routine. And you're watching and saying, oh my gosh, how are we ever going to do that? It just seemed ridiculous that in 60 or 90 minutes, you're going to learn this routine that she just showed you. But then what would happen is, if you could stick around and not go running from the room, is that, of course, she knew how to break it down into 8 count bars. And then at the end of the class, you're doing this routine, and it's just remarkable. And I think sometimes there's that feeling with spirituality, mostly ego, of course, always creating self doubt. But we look at the mountain called spirituality and, just say, oh my goodness, this is so overwhelming. I just don't know if I can do this. And so we just avoid the whole thing and go back to something familiar, no matter how uncomfortable that familiar has become. It's at least familiar. And, you know, to sort of what I love about Raj Yoga is it says you actually aren't having to learn something new. You're awakening something that's already there. So it puts an incredible amount of faith in the self that we have this capacity. It's constantly, nurturing that attitude, that understanding, because I know it just seems so overwhelming. It's like, oh my goodness, these things that are supposed to happen here, and it will challenge what we've become used to and addicted to. So I think there's a lot of obstacles that come up inside. Even though we're capable, our mind is such a powerful thing, and we can think ourselves into all sorts of states if the mind is affected by doubt or fear or just attachment. So I need to know going in that these are going to come up in the types of thoughts that you described. I don't have time. I don't know what I'm doing. It's just too frightening. They're going to come up. And I remember going into dance classes, as I'm going into the room, and there would be this nervousness of like, oh my gosh, am I going to be able to do this? And but you just kind of had to just go, just kind of throw yourself and just start somewhere. And it's amazing. We really undersell ourselves, which is part of that really poor relationship with ourselves. But as we start to break it down, to say step one, experience that you are a soul, take as much time with that. That's so breaking it down. That makes it so easy to begin. And even that I know seems inaccessible and irrelevant and challenging. But the beauty of it is we're given time to do it. It's not, and we kind of want to rush through, and it's like, no, you don't have to. Take the time to really reflect on it and give yourself time to experience it. You have the time. It's not like you've got anything to lose, right? So I think the breaking down of it and the understanding that we are emerging something, drawing something out rather than trying to take on something, I think these are really important things to know as we go into it. The last thing I'll share is that very often we have separated spirituality from life. And so it gets a little bit complicated as to how is this supposed to work. And
Mm-hmm.
again, it's just these very strange mind games that there's a lot of internal resistance from the status quo that's going to pop up because, of course, peace and love and kindness have everything to do with life. So it's really odd that we would think that spirituality isn't relevant. We're talking about quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
So to really kind of sit and check the attitudes I have going in, the doubts, the irrational thoughts that come because of that resistance, I think is valuable to know that it's going to happen when it looks like, and go ahead anyway. I know that was the feeling going into a dance class, is all these fears and doubts, but and the main thing that pulled one is, but it's something I love to do. And I think that's really important. We talk about self-love, but to really appreciate that this is a journey of doing something we love, which is deep care for the self.
Something you mentioned earlier, actually, um, when you were talking about when you were first studying, and you'd have these series of thoughts in front of God, and
Mm-hmm.
it'd always be the same,
Mm-hmm.
same response. Believe in yourself. Um, that actually, touches upon something I was going to ask. Is that in this study, what is his role, especially if the whole journey of this study is to go into the experience of being a soul, for it to be by the end of the study that it would probably be a much more deeper and real experience of what it means to be a soul than when you first started. So, what's his function to play to try to for me to sustain myself in this journey?
There is a beautiful saying that God changes the world with a look. You're thinking, wow, that seems really flimsy, doesn't it? um, the vision or feelings we have on ourselves and each other are not very elevated. We see each other in a physical way, limited way, and whether it's ourselves or others. And the word that we actually use is purity. Um, you know, we know this idea of purity when it comes to infants. There's something very beautiful about an infant, very sweet, very innocent, invaluable. Like they're these little precious things that we protect, right? And somehow we lose that sacred feeling about ourselves as we start to grow. But it's a very beautiful vision. And we think one of the worst crimes possible is to interact with an infant or see an infant in a way that degrades them, that makes them feel unworthy. We consider this one of the worst crimes, and yet we're doing it to ourselves all the time. And so, this impure experience, we've lost the capacity to have a pure experience of ourselves or for each other. There is only one soul who remains in that infant like state, if you will, that very innocent space, and that's the Supreme Soul. So we say, purifier, that our relationship with that being, he's going to look at me in a way that I have not looked at myself for a long time or anybody else has. We say, as a soul, but what it means is in a very pure way. He's going to see the deep, deep value of the self. It's his speciality, is to look at us in this way. And he says, be with me as much as you can, and take that vision in, because that's going to clean the heart. That's going to clean the self. There's a very sweet children's book by Max Lucado called You Are Special, that is perhaps slightly disguised version of this process of Raj Yoga. It's really lovely. So, we have these beings, these wemics who, judge and criticize or praise each other based on superficial features and the effect that has on them. And then there is one soul, Lucia, who visits the toy maker, and she just seems to be unaffected by praise or defamation. She has what's called self respect. And how did she get it? She goes every day and visits the toy maker. That's it. Just hangs out with the toy maker. And there is a character in the story. He's told to go and visit the toy maker too. Just hang out with the toy maker, and get that feeling of, we say, belonging to that one, sort of remembering the specialness of the self, the purity of the self. And it really cleans the heart out, and that restores the self respect, having pure feelings again. So it's critical. This is the only, it's like, some people say, okay, there's only 5 surgeons on the planet that can operate on this particular aspect. And we think, whoa, well, imagine there's only one soul who can do this operation of restoring self respect, only one. And that soul is God. It's like you think there'd be a long lineup. But again, it's how do I get to that being? How do I connect? So it gets very, very interesting. But yeah, he's the being who really is the value maker.
Wow, I feel like we need another whole session right
Yeah.
now for this. But I wanted to invite those who are online. If you have questions or if you have any thoughts on any topics, please send them in the chat box. If you're too shy, you can also email us as well. But perhaps maybe it is sort of a teaser in terms of a future topic is use the term supreme soul.
Mm.
And what is this point of considering myself to be a soul? And what's this relationship with him? Um, it's a big question in the certain terms of it's not just imagining myself to be something or conceptualizing myself to be something, but about him being a soul and me being a soul.
Mhm.
What's the point? The connection.
Yeah, relationship is so powerful, and people actually are doing this all the time. We call it yoga, what you've just described, having a very deep connection with another being or experience, and how that affects me, colors me. And we're all doing it all the time. It's quite fascinating. We're all moving into a certain awareness in order to have a relationship, and then it deeply affects me. We're doing it all the time. I will become a mother in order to have a relationship with a child, and it deeply colors me. Or I will adjust myself at work in order to get along with my colleagues, and we're doing this all the time. We're actually quite competent in considering
Mm.
ourselves to be anything. But it's, of course, a certain quality of things. We're considering ourselves very superficial sometimes, which is not to devalue those roles. To consider myself to be a soul is quite special, that awareness, and because it's not based on anything physical whatsoever, any physical relationships. So we're moving into what we call the eternal. It's really the question again, if I took away the body, if I took away the relationships, if I took away all the different skill sets and the different positions, what's left? Me. That's what's left, pure me, right? So when we're little infants, we're just blank slates, right? We have to learn relationships. We have to learn everything. Otherwise, we're just pure blank slates, right? We're just pure, lovable little bundles of quality, right? So we're kind of getting into that state again. And then in that state, I can actually connect with this being who can draw out the capacities of the soul and remove all the things that have developed when I forgot myself. That's really key. And what are those things? Things like ego, fear, insecurity, reactivity, greed, all of these stress, kind of removing all of those buttons that were developed while I forgot, removing them. It's a very healing process. That's again his speciality, what he does with the force or the beauty of his purity. He actually can melt those things. And for anyone who doubts, I know I've experienced, perhaps you have too, it's very interesting, the power, if you've made a mistake, you've had an interaction with someone, you made a mistake, you did something that might have offended them, whatever the case, but you have to go in front of them, right? And you're feeling very bad about yourself, whether it's them or somebody else, it doesn't matter. And, you're so deeply affected by how that person looks at you. If they judge you, you feel even worse.
Mm.
But if they look at you and say, oh no, I still have faith in you, it's like, okay, I can, it draws something out of you that helps you to put it right. And so this is really the speciality of the Supreme Soul. We say Supreme because he never forgets himself. So the Supreme Soul is to draw out what is good and beautiful within us and to help to melt away the heaviness that happened because we forgot ourselves and acted in that state of forgetfulness. We really committed crimes against our own dignity. And he really helps to, if you will, dissolve the feeling that's left inside of us, that sort of loss of faith in the self. He helps to dissolve that.
Thank you. And just a reminder for those who are watching that the intention of these Tuesday evening sessions are these broad topics in relation to the really core aspects of Raja Yoga. And so for those who join as well on Thursdays, what we call Raja Yoga Essentials, it's about these key pieces of soul, supreme soul, yoga. How do I practice that for these broad topics that are brought up on the Tuesdays to be possible? And that's the intention of these two different sessions. They actually build on each other, but actually on a practical level as well. And so, thank you for lovely, lovely sharing. And perhaps we will have a little reflection. I don't know. This is a really big topic. I feel like not next week, but we should
Mm.
revisit it again.
To me, it is the topic.
The
It is
topic.
the topic. So,
I mean, that's the point of Raj Yoga, and perhaps maybe
mhm.
souls don't realize that that's the
Mhm.
whole point is to gain your
Mhm.
self-respect again.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Sometimes we refer to the experience of being a soul as sitting on the throne of the forehead. Now, I don't have a physical throne behind my forehead, but just imagine internally the feeling of being seated on a throne, the royalty of the self, the dignity of the self, the mastery of the self, the elevation, without the physical throne and all the dressings, just the experience, distill it to the experience, the feeling. And those pure feelings are so much of what it means to be soul conscious. There's nothing physical about it. I'm not even aware of the body while experiencing it. I'm so absorbed in the feelings and concentrating all those beautiful feelings into the point of the self. This very dignified relationship with the self, very graceful experience, sacred. In day to day, I've become very ordinary and sometimes punitive in how I deal with the self, how I feel, my sense of self. But imagine going through the day with very sacred, royal feelings about the self. How would I think? How would I see? How would I interact with others? Just to go into the feelings, the experience, is what considering the self to be a soul can activate, awaken those very pure, kind, benevolent feelings towards the self. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. Well, thank you for those who've joined online. I'm going to hand this back to Judy to share about upcoming sessions while I recede into the IT role.
Thank you to Nora. And what is coming, I always find this funny to share because I know when it's archived, this must sound strange, but on Thursday, we again have Experience Drop-in Meditation at 6:45 to 7:30. And then, as Nora mentioned, another session, interview with a Raj Yogi, but looking specifically at the practice of Raj Yoga. And I believe this coming Thursday is Detached Observer. Again, these are really critical skills that it'd be lovely if we could master them overnight. But it's a very beautiful journey of restoring these spiritual capacities. So feel free to join us on Saturday. We have inner fitness and really lovely topic for those who don't quite see the relevance of spirituality in day-to-day life. From 2 to 3, inner fitness this Saturday will be on integration. So again, you're welcome to join us until we meet again. Om Shanti.